Today, we're going to address several myths and debunk some misconceptions about electric vehicles. First, a new study has now shown that electric vehicle batteries can outlast a vehicle's lifetime with minimal degradation. Apparently, EV batteries only degrade 1.8% per year, so no, you don't ever have to replace your batteries, especially with a 100,000-mile warranty. Second, we'll review all the times a legacy automaker has now announced delays in their plans to go EV. One by one, they're now begging governments to relax their carbon monoxide fleet limits. We'll show you how the amount needed to transition to renewables by 2050 is just a tiny fraction of the fossil fuels we burn each year. Finally, we'll take a look at how likely can EVs revive the cheap car market in the US. And when Tesla releases their more affordable vehicles, what's going to happen in the US market? To help us figure this all out, I've got Hans Nelson joining us. Check out his YouTube channel, Hans C. Nelson, and his X channel as well. Thank you so much, Hans.
Thanks for having me, Herbert.
So these are, the common concerns about electric vehicles, right? The battery degrades, not enough range anxiety, it's too expensive. So let's address some of these at this point. So some new study that just came out was these electric vehicle batteries can outlast a vehicle's lifetime with minimal degradation, according to the study. It's actually gotten better now by almost a quarter in the past 5 years. So they're not only already pretty good now, but they're going to keep improving as time goes on. So this is Vice President of the UK and Ireland at Geotab, a company called Geotab. They did this study, and what he says is batteries in the latest EV models will comfortably outlast the usable life of the vehicle, will likely not need to be replaced. Geotab is a Canadian-based fleet management company. They looked at, so in 2019, the firm reported that EV batteries degrade by 2.3% on average every year. Now the new study is even better. It's now at 1.8%. They looked at 5,000 fleet and private electric vehicles, representing nearly 1.5 million days of telematics data, and they looked at the average annual degradation rate. So it's 22% better than when they did 2019, and even better, the top performing vehicles, they only had a 1% per year. So this is the average of 1.8% per year. We still see battery reliability being used as a stick to beat EVs with. Hopefully data like ours can finally put these myths to bed. And, he explained down here that in the case of a Tesla Model Y, long-range all-wheel drive, one of the best-selling EVs in the world, its original 320-mile range would go down to 204 miles, which would still be plenty for town driving or even short road trips. This is in 20 years. So in 20 years, you would go from 320 to 204. So it's almost like a 30% reduction. That's it. What do you think, Hans?
Yeah, it's great to see this data. I mean, we've always known that reliability of batteries was really an engineering challenge, and then an engineering especially applied to scaled production of batteries. And to see this data continue to trend in the right direction is really good. And then to see such a low, average degradation amount is really good as well. Especially when you highlight, those best in class, that is where we're headed ultimately. And so, I think within a few years from now, we could be looking at the average degradation being 1% per year instead of that 1.8% per year. And so to see what the leading edge of what we can do is, and then to project forward, I think that this is something that's very encouraging. And this is also going to be something that we should look at with the lithium iron phosphate batteries, as that chemistry increases in the overall amount of EVs that use it. I think that's a phenomenal battery chemistry also for degradation. And, that's an exciting piece of information to look out for as well, that, as we get better ranges on these lithium iron phosphate batteries, and if they're great on the degradation front, then that's a huge win for consumers. And like you said, really at the end of the day, this is a non-issue for people who own the vehicles. Like once you get into the car and you've driven it for yourself and you understand what the limitations of range are and the benefits of home charging, assuming that you can charge at home, then you really can put a lot of these concerns about range anxiety and how often you're going to have to change these batteries to rest. And man, to think about what Jeff Don has been working on, that essentially what this data tells me is that we're pretty much there. He talked about having 500,000 mile life
Hmm.
batteries, and you may not have the best of range when you arrive at that 500,000 miles worth of travel on a battery pack, but you can get there, and you can get there probably better, more easily with the battery itself than you can with the vehicle that's going to be falling apart around you, probably multiple times over in that, half mile or 500,000 mile overall lifespan.
Everybody keeps thinking if you buy an electric vehicle that you're going to have to replace that battery. Do you not know how expensive it is to replace that battery? Well, here we go. 20 years from now, it's only going to be 36% reduction in battery degradation. That's not terrible
Mhm.
at all. And then if you take a look at this warranty here, Omar pointed out that the myth that you will have to regularly replace your battery at great expense is a total myth. New EVs come with 100,000-mile warranties on the battery and drivetrain. Anything happens, it's not your problem. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that is a great warranty. And then, one of the other things that I'll point out is that while, every now and then batteries will need to be replaced, a lot of those replacements do happen inside of warranty. And so the consumer never ends up paying for it. And that is in stark contrast to, a lot of the more recent and specifically GM larger vehicles. They have transmissions that are awful transmissions, and they have been redesigned recently, and they are not coming with a very long warranty on the transmission. And those transmissions oftentimes go out shortly after the warranty expires and leave owners having to foot the bill to get these transmissions replaced, and ending up having to replace them with a similarly faulty transmission overall. And those are expensive. It's not as expensive to replace one of those transmissions as it is to replace a battery, but it's certainly in the multiple thousands of dollars each time. And if you end up having to do that multiple times over, say, a $300,000 or $400,000 life, or sorry, 300,000 or 400,000 mile lifespan, you could definitely spend more in replacing transmissions on an ICE vehicle than you would in
Okay.
replacing a battery over that same lifespan. And that's just something that we kind of, this is going to be manufacturer specific. So if you're buying a Toyota, you're a lot less likely to run into those types of issues than if you're buying a GM product, or even, a Ford product. I don't think their transmissions are the ones that specifically have issues as often as the GM products, but there are other things that go wrong on a Ford more likely. And so you really do have to take in the overall reliability of the vehicle, and that's where, when you look at the data, Tesla pretty much outshines everything out there.
Yeah. And you're pointing out that a 100,000-mile warranty on the EV batteries is 8 years, typically at 15,000 miles average. But I don't drive that at all. I'm half that. So for me, it's like 16 years to get there. But it's 8 years, yeah. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to watch for is, can the EVs revive the cheaper car in the US? Because what happened in the US was SUVs and pickups killed these low compact cars, the sedans. You can see here in this table from Cox Automotive from 2012. In black here is those cars that are under $20,000. It just basically disappeared. You can't buy a car for under 20,000 anymore. And then in the darker blue, it's a 20,000 to $30,000, and you can see how it's fallen percentage of sales. And then you can see every car basically is starting to fall, and what's growing is the 60,000 and up car. That's the one that's taking over. So that's what's happening recently. And the question is, what's going to happen when you've got electric vehicles, and especially when Tesla comes out with the two more affordable vehicles next year, and prices continue to keep falling? Yeah, quick question, thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely, yeah, inflationary in not only the types of vehicles, but there's a lot more safety regulation that goes into cars, whether it's emission standards, whether it's crash standards, and all of those things are making cars more expensive overall. And I think that has an outsized impact on the cheapest cars in the overall lineup for an individual vehicle manufacturer. That if you're trying to sell, in volume, say something like a Toyota Corolla, we won't pick on that specifically, since you know Toyota does continue to sell those. But if you're Ford and you're trying to compete with the Corolla with something like a Ford Focus, and all of a sudden you've got these extra regulations that are making your already thin margins on the Focus non-existent, well, of course you're going to abandon that and you're going to move to some of your larger vehicles where you have higher percentages of gross profit and you can eat that a little bit better. And I think that's been, one of the driving forces in just the removal of these smaller cars from the lineup for a lot of manufacturers. And so, but the effect of that is it does create kind of a pocket where there's just not supply for these vehicles, even though there probably is a greater demand for it. And that demand ends up moving more towards the used vehicles instead. Um, but if you could buy a new car for that lower price point, and not only is it a car that you could buy at a lower price point, but its operating costs are also a lot lower. I think that you're going to have a lot of demand for something like that. And that is the opportunity that we would love to see Tesla address as quickly as possible. And so we just kind of have to wait to see when will that vehicle arrive, what will the volume be that they're able to ramp to quickly, and what will the market response be. I think it'll be favorable on on the market response side, but we do have to get these vehicles out into the market and we have to get them out in volume.
Yeah, they're coming at the right time because looks like the new data shows this is it. You can't really continue selling these cars anymore. Car dealership reported this. New car buyers are hitting a wall. A new survey reveals that many shoppers are facing the sticker shock. New car prices averaged over $47,000, and the loan rates stay above 7%. Today, we'll have the Fed come out and maybe they'll do a 25% cut or a 50% basis point cut, but still, it's too high interest rates. The average driver hasn't bought a car since 2018. This is what you're saying. They're buying the used cars now. When prices were lower, interest rates were better. Dealerships offered more deals. Now, nearly half of new car shoppers want to spend under $35,000 on a new car, over $10,000 less than the average price. What do? Used car buyers aren't catching a break either. Only 5% of deals are falling under $15,000. These conditions are forcing consumers to make tough choices, stretch the budget, go smaller, hold off until the market cools down. Craziest part, more than 50% of respondents plan to work more hours or even take on a second job to fund their next car purchase. So the more affordable cars, I think it's going to have a huge market when it comes out next year. Or maybe interest rates will be cut so low that this will revert back. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect the interest rates to go very low very fast. I'm definitely more in, not that I want this, but I just think the most likely outcome is rates are going to stay higher for longer than we want. And then in that environment, I think the reason that we are seeing those used car prices remain so elevated is because there is that void of supply of affordable new cars. And so if we can see a supply of new cars that come in at those lower, sub $30,000 price points increase, then I think that will put a little bit more pressure on the used car prices, and then maybe those can come down. I think that that would be good for the consumer, and a deflationary force, which is needed in the overall automotive sector.
All right. So next story here is legacy car makers. What's going to happen to them and their EVs? So Alex Voigt said, I said it more than a decade ago, and I am saying it again today. The legacy car manufacturers will pay a high price if they do not fully commit to BEVs, and this price may be for some existential. Here you got many car makers have toned down their ambitious EV targets. Look at every single car maker, and these are all kind of like the restatement of what they think they're going to be able to do for battery electric vehicle, and all these guys have pushed to, their production target by 30%, by 50%, blah, 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 blah. Each one of them, I won't read all of these out. You can come back to this table and take a look at it. At the same time, you got one large automaker, legacy automaker going after another, begging governments to lower the CO2 fleet limits because they can't keep paying, the penalties to come to the ZEV credits to Tesla. And they want to get rid of that requirement because it's going to take them a lot longer to switch from ICE vehicles to BEV vehicles. Um, Volkswagen not selling as many BEVs as they should have has nothing to do with the demand for BEVs, which is growing. That's what Alex Voigt is saying. But with Volkswagen Group's inability to produce affordable and competitive BEVs. Yeah. And then Elon replied to that saying, if they just make great EVs, there's no problem. So after we filmed this segment, this news just came out that the European Commission rebuffs the car industry's calls to delay the carbon monoxide targets. So this just came out. They're saying now that no, we're not going to be able to push this back as per the requirements by all these automakers. They said that the targets that apply from 2025 were adopted in 2019. So, you had plenty of time. So, and they warn the car makers that they could face fines of up to 16 billion euro if they don't comply by the 2025 target. So, my gosh, these legacy automakers are in big trouble.
Yeah, I think, I understand the strategy from a legacy automotive standpoint. It makes a lot of sense to say, hey, we're going to put out aggressive targets. We want to, produce X amount of BEVs in 2025, and we're going to take the leadership position from Tesla at that point in time. And so you make that type of public statement, then you go to your government and you say, hey, we're going to need money in order to accomplish these goals. We need lots of subsidies in order to do this. And oh, by the way, we're going to make this carve out here in these subsidies and make sure that our hybrids are included in these subsidies. The premise for getting this subsidy through government is that we're going to be producing BEVs. But then when the rubber meets the road, hey, we're not actually going to produce those BEVs. We're just going to produce these hybrids. And then what you get to do is you get to continue producing your ICE vehicles and putting a little tiny battery and a little tiny electric motor in it, that is more than paid for by the subsidy. And so you get to basically steal taxpayer money to continue to run your business the way you always have, and the way that you would like to continue to run it indefinitely. Now, it's a smart short-term strategy. I think that's not a smart long-term strategy, but I understand why these very cynical automakers are pursuing it. And remember, Volkswagen is the company that got caught cheating on all kinds of emission standards, and so they have no qualms at violating these types of regulations for their own personal benefit. Um, that said, I think I'm actually okay with them saying, with not with Volkswagen, but I'm okay with the government in the EU in general, whether that's, specifically Germany, whether that's France, whether it's any of the other member nations of the EU saying, you know what, the emissions requirements, we're going to throw those out the window. If at the same time they said, but we're going to open up the market to Chinese EVs, and then you just have to compete. Because I think that really, ultimately, the thing that needs to be allowed to win is the technology that is the most economical. And if that is ICE technology, then so be it. If it is EV technology, well, then so be it. And the cost trends are clear that over time, EVs are going to absolutely destroy ICE vehicles when it comes to economics. And so if they allow other automakers who are not located there in the EU to import vehicles into the market that are more competitive than the poorly made EVs that Volkswagen is currently manufacturing, then that will take care of itself. But I do think it's very disingenuous and cynical. While I say, not surprising, but very distasteful practice for them to lobby the government to give them extra money, support us, protect us from competition. Oh, and in return for all of that, we're still not going to try and help you meet these goals of reducing carbon emissions here locally. And so, that's like a lose, lose, lose for citizens in Germany, and the EU in general, except for the ones that work directly for Volkswagen and are financially profiting from these decisions.
Yeah. We'll cover a story shortly here talking about the tariffs that EU is trying to apply to the Chinese government. Yeah, I've been saying that you know, they might be successful convincing the governments to ease up on these restrictions, but it doesn't matter what they do because the challenge is the Chinese are the government there supporting the move to EVs, and they're all going that route. And so then it just doesn't matter what you guys do because at the end of the day, they're going to win anyways. But I
Yeah,
like your
as long
point.
as
Yeah.
Volkswagen, doesn't get their way in, asking the same government to ease up on emission standards and then to
Yeah.
impose a bunch of tariffs on Chinese EVs that protects them. Like it should be one or the other. You can have one, but you can't have both. Because having both is just awful for the consumers there locally.
Another big giant myth is people keep saying, don't you know that electric vehicles are actually damaging to the environment? And you pointed this out, which is great. Alcostra, I actually interviewed him before as well, and he said self explanatory. Here's a visual here of the yearly amount of material needed for the transition to your renewables by 2050. It's this tiny little thing here compared to this giant fossil fuels we burn each year. So it is just that's the facts. Okay, so you're trying to explain that. Oh my God, don't you realize how much we're hurting the environment? When people complain about the amount of mining, lithium, copper needed to enable the transition from fossil fuels to batteries, just show them this graph from Future Crunch. Total transition mineral mining needed is 0.186% of the coal, gas, and oil extracted every year.
Yeah, like you said, self-explanatory, a great image to help people wrap their minds around, just the differences in scale. Yes, we do need to mine minerals. Yes, it's kind of a large amount of minerals for the time being, but there's a couple of, it's way less than we have to extract fossil fuels from the Earth's crust currently. And a lot of those minerals are going to be highly, highly reusable, and we're not burning them and just releasing them into the atmosphere. And so, it just makes a lot more sense to do the renewable path than it does to do the just uh, current trajectory of using fossil fuels, whether that's coal, natural gas, oil. Over the long term, the financial implications are pretty clear which
Yeah.
one's going to win and which one's not.
We're already there. Solar and energy renewables is already cheaper than oil at this point. So looks like that data is looking good. EVs are already displacing nearly 1.8 million barrels of oil every day, roughly the same amount as Mexico consumes, according to Bloomberg. That number is set to double by 2027 and triple by 2029, causing oil use in the road sector to peak in 3 years. So we're almost there. Here's the table, and you can see that in the dark blue is fossil gasoline. The light blue is biogasoline. Then you got fossil diesel. Then you got biodiesel, and then LPG. Yeah, 60 million barrels per day.
Yeah, and I think that our total use of fossil fuels was around 100 million barrels per day in 2022. So we have, come down.
Yeah, so it's rising. Of course, it's probably the COVID hit here. And then by
Okay.
2027, this will be the peak, and then we'll start seeing it. All of this going to fall in
Okay,
terms
so
of
this
the
is this is
yeah
road specifically, road fuel
road
demand.
fuel. Okay.
Yeah, and so yeah, overall usage I think was 100, just on it was like 97 million barrels per day, but that was not just road. So to say, hey, we've got, we're reducing 1.8 million barrels per
Hmm.
day off of, 60 million just use it on roads, then that means, let's see if
Hmm.
we can do some quick math, like 3 to
Well,
4%
yeah,
of road fuel usage that
yeah,
is reduced already. And then if we triple that
yeah.
going
Hit the
into
10%.
2029, then you're talking about 10 to 12%
Just
overall,
perfect.
which is great. Yeah, to see that amount of impact that quickly. And then, I think that's where the
Hmm.
exponential curve really hits a knee and begins to increase dramatically thereafter.
Okay, and then we've got the EU and China are going to discuss the electric EV trade tariffs later this week. Looks like they're going to meet on Thursday, discuss the current state of the trade relationship between China and Europe. Um, yeah, so they've been trying to figure out because like I think it was last month, European Union slapped some big tariffs And it was based on whether or not the government of China is subsidizing that company. So Tesla, I can't remember now, was only 9% of additional tariffs, but some of the other state-owned companies from China, it's like 36% or something like that. So here we go. We got these governments, trying to stand up and say, let's renegotiate this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and China does have a lot of leverage, I think, to actually get some concessions from the EU on this. And so, it's hard to say if these tariffs were initially just a bargaining chip for the EU against China, and where all of this is going to shake out. But this is where I will go back to the earlier point that if the legacy automakers in Europe are going to use the EU as a protective shield against Chinese automakers through the use of tariffs, then they should be held to higher standards of execution for transitioning to pure BEVs. But if they would like to, stay, if they don't want to have those limitations of, their CO2 emissions being put on them, then they should be subjected to more fair competition directly from China. So we'll just have to watch and see how this plays out. But like I said, I do think that China has a lot of leverage now to get these reduced in return. And I would expect the tariffs at least to be reduced from where they're set today in the near future.
Thank you so much, Hans. We debunked a bunch of myths. Appreciate you. Follow him on X at Hans C. Nelson. Check out his YouTube channel as well. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com.